Hello and welcome to the season opener on Microsoft Edge Hardening. We got Mark Menzies from Overview, right? Overview TS, I have that right?
Overview Technology Solutions, yes, sir.
Overview Technology Solutions, premier MSP out of the great state of Indiana. We got Rich always joining us. Well, I mean, New York, I guess, is the headquarters, but you're
We
in
got New York and
Indiana.
Indiana. I'm all over the place. We're all over the place too.
And Rich McGraw, always favorite co-host, joining from CIS, representing. So very excited for today's episode. Like I said, opener on Microsoft Edge. So we covered 10 episodes on how to secure Google Chrome, and that was about 98 settings. Microsoft Edge has a little bit more flexibility as any Microsoft platform does, and we're going to cover about 120 settings in this season. So very excited to get into it. But per usual, let's first share what's going on with Senteon. So we can pop my screen share up. Awesome. So very first, at the highest level, guys, Senteon is performing remediation to harden workstations, servers, and browsers to CIS. This week, I am doing an interview with Luis Giraldo from ScalePad, and we will be talking about, is security posture management a hot potato? I'm interested. I'll be asking Mark when we kick off, who's responsible for security posture? Or do people just keep on handing it off one by one? Senteon will also be joining Can ITCon as a sponsor, so check us out over there. That'll be very exciting. And if you ever want to watch a recap of any of these episodes, check out our website. We have everything set up right here, so you can find it immediately after. We also do other episodes regarding automation and just general topics that are valuable to MSPs. We also do turn these into blogs afterwards, so plenty of ways. And for joining the webinar, you do get free access to the Senteon portal here. We can take the settings and we do crosswalk them across regulated frameworks like I have pre-populated here, 800, 171 and CMMC. So you can click into the setting, see the pathway, see the information, and most importantly, you have all the information you need to harden things manually if you so choose. But if you want to give Senteon a test run, we can perform automation on all of these settings completely for you with a learning mode. That way you can get this beautiful report, add in the frameworks you care about, and then you're off to the races. So thank you all for joining, and let's kick into the episode. Mark, I kind of led you off right there. I was going to be asking you, security posture management. Is this a hot potato, or are people actually doing this? Who's responsible?
Who's responsible? Well, I was having a conversation with my attorney today about, doing some due diligence before purchasing a business, and they were saying, make sure that the you get all the information from their accountant, because the business owner's just going to say, oh, my accountant's taking care of that, my accountant's taking care of that, and the business owners kind of C-suite generally says, oh, our IT company must be handling that, they must be handling that, they must be handling that, why wouldn't they be? So, it's the MSPs or MSSPs responsibility to have the conversation with the client and say, the security posture should be defined by the client, by what they define as the relevant regulatory compliance requirements that they have, as well as other framework, requirements that they self-impose, and then creating shared responsibility, matrix or some sort of, bilateral, this is what you do, this is what I do, as the service provider. So the posture is the responsibility ultimately of the client because it's their business. Sure. But in terms of due diligence, it's your responsibility to have the discussion with them from an ethical perspective. Also, they don't know what they don't know.
And a big thing you said there is document and have that conversation. It sounds like you might really care about having things written down and attestable, defensible. What's your background, Mark? I know a little bit of CMMC blood in you, but introduce yourself and why documentation is part of that answer.
Yeah, so I'm a CMMC certified assessor, and documentation is super important for defensibility and such. Too much documentation could at times be a good thing, but ultimately, when you're trying to defend something or lend defensibility to something that you've implemented or something along those lines, it's important to have relevant documentation. Now, documentation isn't always perfect in terms of process and procedure, but at the end of the day, if you have some other form of documentation, meeting notes, something like that to lend to your credibility and that you were trying to do the right thing, that goes a pretty far way. It's about the, the spirit of what you were trying to do in many cases with cybersecurity. Large regulatory bodies are looking for maturity, but not perfection. They're looking for, if the mistake is made, that's okay for the most part. It's how you respond to that mistake and what you were trying to do overall, that you weren't being, negligent with your responsibilities.
And I know this is something Matt Lee preaches as well, that term defensibility, and CIS is a massive kind of help to that, because something I preach is, yes, Senteon can align everything to CIS for you, but what if your engineer says, I'd rather do this, or, my gut says to configure this setting this way? What's more defensible, following CIS with what Rich preaches, or the gut of your senior engineer?
So a lot of times the gut can be attributed to some sort of pain of something else that doesn't necessarily translate to a security best practice. Sometimes it does. A lot of times it does. Like, if you feel that you can guess somebody's username and password and they don't have MFA, your gut says something's wrong, and you're right. There is some sort of control or practice or something somewhere in some framework saying that you should be doing that. Depends on what you're doing internally, what you've enabled. So in terms of defensibility, though, it's always better to have some sort of guiding document or framework or body or regulatory requirement guiding your steps in terms of what you're implementing internally, or with your client or something like that. It lends defensibility, because you can always say, well, the Center for Internet Security here, their framework is saying that we should be doing this as part of implementation group 1. And so that we did all of these things and we still got, we still have an issue, or we had some sort of breach or something like that. It lends defensibility to the fact that they were trying to do the right thing versus, which helps with credibility in terms of, if you do have an incident, look, they were doing the right thing, versus they had an incident. Oh, there was no multi-factor authentication on. Well,
Rich, you agree this is kind of the point of view of CIS, right? This is that anything that you'd add to that response?
Yeah, we're talking about the CIS controls policy now, but whatever policy you choose, we obviously like the controls, but with tools like Senteon, you can do those crosswalks out to other things. With the CIS controls, we have broken them up into implementation groups that really give you that prioritized path for the best security in your environment. So I always recommend people follow the CIS controls implementation groups and then use something like Senteon and do your crosswalks and fill in the gaps. But it's really critical these days to have a policy. It doesn't have to be CIS. We love it if it is, but just follow one and really stick to it, and because it clearly makes a difference in your security posture overall. And as Mark says, in the unlikely event that you do have an incident, it gives you that documentation that you can go back on and say, hey, we made a mistake, but we're really doing our best. Help us out. And that is typically works out a lot better than if the incident happened and you don't have any, there's no policy or anything like that. So
spot on.
I completely agree, Mark.
Awesome. And we got Degley in the audience too. So Mark, you're gonna be put on the spot now. So Degley, feel free to ask the hard questions. Put Mark out there. But we will get into the settings, right? I do want to jump right into those. But Mark, you mentioned in your answer a lot about policy and CIS and everything. CIS, as we know, is very prescriptive. Do this, do that. Gives you really explicit instruction. Yes. You being a certified assessor for CMMC and the policies you follow, it's, from what I understand, not the expert here, is sometimes interpretable. How do you navigate this?
Yeah. I mean, I foresee in maybe a decade there being like CMMC attorneys. Maybe now, even like it's pretty crazy, because you have a lot of things that you have to deal with, from interpretation of what is or isn't CUI, which shouldn't be interpreted, should be literally prescribed by the federal government. But there is room for interpretation there sometimes based on who you're talking to. Yeah, it should be absolute. In practice, it's not. A lot of bad information out there from. Anyway, I could do an hour on that. But but CMMC is mostly around the 110 controls and then the 320 assessment objectives from there. So for example, in 3.1.1, are users identified? For example, I think it's 3.1.1. That's one of the assessment objectives. Are all of your users enumerated? Do you know who's in there? It doesn't tell you how to do it. It doesn't give you any information on should it be in a spreadsheet? Is it in your GRC? Is it written in a chalkboard? So it's much less prescriptive.
Mark, looks like the audience is potentially giving you a hard time already.
It's just Degly, right?
Just Degly. What's hardening?
Well, I really want to know what is an asset. So that's the better question. Get Matt in here, right?
I love it. All right. So what is hardening is a perfect transition. Let's get to the point of the episode here. So hardening Microsoft Edge. Let's pull up the slides here. And before we show the first setting, you are an Edge user. I asked you, did you want to do an episode on Chrome hardening or Edge hardening? You were an advocate. Like, I want to do the Edge hardening. You took on the season opener. Is there a difference using one browser or the other? Do you actually have a strong feeling, or it's just preference?
So, we try to, especially when you involve other things, like from a hardware perspective, manufacturers, from a software perspective, in CMMC, at least, the fewer vendors you have to deal with, the few shared responsibility matrices you have, the fewer this, the fewer that. So we like using Edge browser on a Microsoft device, like Chrome, not Chrome, Surface, book or something like that, and then running Microsoft OS. It just makes it a little bit easier from a whole bunch of perspectives. So we find that managing Chrome and Edge are similar. You do have a little bit more granularity with Edge, especially if you're using like something like Intune or something like that, or using something like Senteon. You have more options, but both work, but we prefer Edge.
That's awesome.
Hey, Zach, can I jump in here just for
go for it, brother?
I thought it was interesting here at CIS this week. We had an IT notification come out talking about browser settings and the importance of them internally.
I did not have this in a CIS newsletter. This is internal previews we're getting.
Yeah. I was like, man, maybe our IT staff is watching our series. But it's just an internal notification saying, hey, these browser settings are very important, and listed out some reasons and some of the SaaS apps that we connect to, and don't save your passwords into browsers and all the kinds of stuff that we've been talking about. So it was interesting to see that come out in a internal CIS.
I think our webinar series is getting CIS to perk up a little bit too. I mean, we can see Stuffy in the comments, a little perked up a little too much, it looks like, but really excited to get into the settings too. And Rich, as Senteon's going through these recommendations as well, we've really outlined, there's some new settings coming out. So it is pretty exciting because CIS does its best to stay up to date. And we're excited as a company. These recommendations come in, we add them, keep things up to date. So that's awesome to hear CIS themselves is prioritizing it internal.
And for the other product vendors out there, we are making our IP easier to consume and to do those faster updates that Zach is talking about. So that's really cool too.
Awesome. All right, Mark, ready for the technical part of the show?
Oh, I am.
Right after we got done talking about Google, the first setting in the CIS benchmarks to secure Microsoft Edge is enable Google Cast is set to disabled. This sounds like you don't want to accidentally screencast, or what's this saying?
Yeah, so this is basically saying that you can cast, and everybody's casted from their cell phone or from browser or something like that. You just don't want to enable either a threat actor or somebody meaning to do harm, either intentionally, unintentionally, from displaying information on something other than what's right in front of them. Right? If you have that Samsung TV in the next room and you cast something by accident, that could be bad for 1,000 reasons. So turning that off is a best practice. There's other ways to share your screen. There might be exceptions to this, as with anything else that you may need to document for maybe certain members. There's 100 ways to lock that down. So or either through technical controls or administrative controls. So and
I think that's a good point. There are other ways to share your screen. CIS, and Rich, you can expand on this if you'd like, but CIS does take these considerations that the MSP, the end user, whoever's using these recommendations has no other security stack except what's built into Edge, built into Chrome, whatever. So in a case they don't have another way, maybe there is a reason to keep this setting available. But to that end, there are probably more secure ways, more third-party choices that screencasting could be done.
Yeah, I see this as a setting that's really vulnerable to configuration drift because you turn it off and then you never turn it, you never turn it back on. So it's just one to be
opposite, but
careful with.
But
I mean, I can't
spot
remember
on
the last
too.
time I actually tried to cast from a web browser. Normally, I'm trying to, if I'm sharing my screen, it's generally to people who are not in the same room as me, could be to a TV or something like that. But again, there are other ways to do it that may be considered more secure.
Yep. Spot on. Let's hit up this next setting here. And it's absolutely insane. When I was making these slides, like I wanted to do one season on Chrome and Edge combined, and these settings are just all so different. This is one of them that had overlap, but the rest of them, like the other 119, like completely different. So allow read access via the file system API on these sites is set to disabled. API access, allowing anything that you maybe don't know has access, scares me. But what does this really mean here?
Yeah, so it's just allowing the like it says the file system API from reading certain local files. So you don't want your web browser looking at your local files unless you are specifically telling it to. Even if at all. So this comes down to least privilege or least functionality rather. If this is not necessary, then you shouldn't have it enabled. Then there's a lot of functionality that going back to like what Netscape in 1990 something, it's web browsers are basically mini operating systems in some ways. You can do so much in them, and they interface in such a rich way with the internet at this point, and there are so much stuff you have to turn off in order to prevent a threat actor from exploiting one of them. So we like turning this off also. It should be set to disabled, in my opinion. There are some times when it might need to be enabled, especially for certain types of file uploads. But when you run into those, you make exceptions and you document them.
So that's a big thing you just said. There are use cases that this is going to be needed. So to talk about the slide format really quick, in the bottom left, you're going to see the CIS control mapping if applicable. So this does map directly back to a control. So you can better attest to that's perfect pointing. I've never had anyone do that. Can you reach across to the other corner and talk about the level?
I mean, if you're able to...
The other corner that Mark can't reach, it does say level 2. So CIS also breaks that was really good. Yeah. Breaks their recommendations up from level 1, where they recommend minimum to no disruption. Every business needs this. Level 2, disruption probably will happen. Take more consideration before just flipping the switch, right? So that's what Mark is talking about. Sometimes this will maybe need to be accepted, right? But make the exception, review, and so forth.
In my opinion, Zach, the browser is a tool for access, and it should be kept separate from the data layer, in my opinion.
Yeah, I actually like, Mark, if you don't mind elaborating, you did talk about least privilege access, and also you kind of said, I think Edge is almost its own OS or something. You said it's its own piece of asset, right? Or all browsers. Elaborate more on that, because I don't think hardening the browser is something that's really prioritized today. Like maybe you can't save password to the browser, but that's one of about 120 settings.
So if you think of, let's call it best practices in general, you want to lock down, to what Rich was saying, you having the that was great audio sound there, great ASMR, man. I love that. But separating that data layer, in the browser from the rest of the operating system is that browser from the data layer is super important, because if you think of things like accidental or purposeful data exfiltration and such, everyone's turning off USB or restricting it heavily. They're doing things with HID devices, to prevent. Actually, that has nothing to do with that, but I know it's later on in the slide deck. But there are a whole bunch. There are a whole bunch of controls that we implement regularly that have to do with preventing data exfiltration, and one of the more difficult ones to implement, properly is through how data can be, files can be uploaded through the web browser, and or data could be exfiltrated through the web browser. Somebody signing into their personal Gmail account and uploading a file, for example, if you're, file USB blocking is not going to prevent that. Your EDR, XDR, whatever DR is not going to prevent that for the most part. You need
command and control usually uses a browser, right?
Exactly.
And you're talking about other layers with EDR probably doesn't account for that, and XYZ doesn't account for that. Could you elaborate a little bit on your point of view just with defense in depth, right? So Senteon's point of view is hardening is its own layer. Configuration management is a layer, right? Each asset within configuration could have its own layer, right? Talk towards defense in depth, and is this something you try to preach at overview? Is this part of your strategy?
Yeah, so especially as a managed services provider, providing defense in depth without having like a dedicated person per client is sometimes very difficult. So we do fall back and rely on best practices and then certain customization per client. So in terms of defense in depth, it's not possible to protect any sort of asset to protect any. I'm going to laugh every time we drink. To protect any asset, data or otherwise, solely with a single security product or from a single technical control or something like that. It's simply not possible at this point because of how complex things are. So at the end of the day, you need multiple points of basically, consider security to be like an onion. I'm sure we've all heard this before. Different layers are required, and that defense in depth, comes from the maturity of that like layered approach. And at the end of the day, sometimes you can't always tackle a problem with a technical control, or tackling a problem with a technical control could lead to other problems within the organization. In terms of that CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, availability. If things aren't available. Yeah, exactly. If availability can mean a few things, but if your data is not available because your controls are too tight, then the business can't function. Then what's the point? So a lot of times you'll end up having to use administrative controls or some technical control to monitor administrative control. That's not necessarily prevent something from happening. So it gets really complex. I'd like to think over the next few years we're going to have a better way of handling this as managed services providers, because right now it's I think we're still a little bit in the Wild West, but we're getting better, especially with a lot of different regulatory bodies are starting to crack down. FINRA being one of them, SEC. Obviously the DoD with through CMMC. We're seeing that a lot more, and the solutions that are maturing, like Senteon, are making it a lot. You're welcome, dude. Ding one. Are making it a lot easier for us to do that.
Every ding is 1% off. But no, you bring up a really good point there, and this is talking to the trends, even the trends I'm seeing. So I will venture to say 90% of MSPs either have some type of AV or EDR that they manage. Probably more than that, honestly.
I'd hope.
But I'd hope. I mean, we'll leave it at 90 anyway. It seems like in that response and the trends I'm seeing with cyber insurance forms, regulations, it's forcing a lot of vendors to start taking their right of boom technology and start trying to perform more left of boom activities. Senteon as a company is fully left of boom, but it seems like the right of boom companies are shifting over. Is that something you're seeing as well? And if so, what's driving that in your opinion?
I mean, at the end of the day, one of the big things that we saw a long time ago was with threat actors was the the data encryption. Threat actor gets in, they encrypt your data, and you're not doing any sort of backup, so you have to pay your ransom, right? And nowadays, it's not just about the ransom; it's about the data exfiltration. It's about the company data that's important, whether it needs to be protected by some sort of regulation, or the release of that data would be bad for the organization for from a for 100 reasons, reputation, etc. Preventative measures are going to be more effective than the right of boom measures after the fact. Recovering from a breach in terms of the data recovery because things have been locked or encrypted or ransomed isn't going to you'll restore your environment, but you're going to deal with a whole host of other problems.
Root cause
and that's
this.
yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
We'll be talking a little bit about that in a webinar I'm doing with Eric Taylor and Chris Lair on the IR and forensic side
Eric
of
Taylor.
hardening.
We
Yeah,
covered
he's
some of
coming on.
that, a couple weeks ago with Joe Alapat in Lion Guard.
Joe talked about that too.
Yeah.
What was it? Cyber resilience framework he introduced to us.
Yeah, it generally speaks to left of boom.
Yep. So it's about knowing where your vendors sit and choosing a stack that covers all aspects. All right. Let's keep this moving. So the next setting here is going to be talking about, I believe, background images. Let's moderator. All right. Choose whether users can receive customized background images and text suggestions, notifications, and tips for Microsoft services is set to disabled. This is a mouthful of a GPO, but kind of sounds like we just don't want our employees to get distracted. Is there an actual security aspect to this setting? What's your take here?
Yeah, so for this one, I'm pretty sure a lot of quite a few of the reasons for disabling this are related to I don't think it's distraction as much as potentially malicious content running without the user's knowledge and permission and things like that. And I've found that turning this off doesn't necessarily break things, and it's a best practice, so we do it. I'm it doesn't break stuff usually. I think
cannot
this is
be held liable.
Information on exactly.
Yeah,
No,
this can also be a mechanism, Zach, for Microsoft or other organizations to kind of collect information in the background somehow, or even explicitly ask for information from a user. And you don't necessarily want that.
Yeah, I mean, if it is being customized and, custom personalized tips and stuff, there could be some type of, tracking, key lock, whatever that is, right? The tips come from somewhere. They're not just randomized. So Microsoft is like, oh, this tip will be valuable. How did they determine that?
Exactly. And like you're saying, advertisement targeting and things like that. Sometimes it is useful, sometimes it's not. But you don't want the website to create, to have some sort of like unsolicited, data collection or something like that. Yep. And we all know that, especially with I'm going to say AI. What are we in? Like we're 27 minutes in. Someone said AI finally.
Brian Weiss just came out of the shadows.
Yeah, right. Slowly crept in. Oh, he's in the room with me now. But in all seriousness, we have these large data sets that exist now with all of our information in it, and with the usage of artificial intelligence and more machine learning and things like that, it's easier for all those little pieces to be put together to form a sentence, as it were. And so that's a big thing. That's why I tell family members, hey, those lovely little Facebook tests of you're I don't know, you're I don't know, I can't say what I want to say. A certain, your I don't know, your teacher name would be the street you grew up on.
This is what you'll look like in 50 years. This is
Don't give away personalized information, because that data could be aggregated elsewhere and be used against you. Like, in isolated, the data is, that they're collecting is not useful. Aggregated together, it is. And this, helps to stop doing that too.
Well, and we're talking about a work environment here too. So we don't really need to promote the vacation that's on sale and everything else. I mean, people want to do that at home. It's one thing, but it's not appropriate for a work environment.
Agreed.
So to put one bow on this one with just kind of like a real life metaphor, if someone were able to figure out my favorite destination, my favorite artists, my favorite bands, right? And then I buy a new house and the house is already decorated with all of my favorite things, but I never explicitly told anyone, maybe that's cool. It's everything I love, but how did they know that? Is that okay that they know that?
You're pretty simple, Zach. Everyone knows you.
Exactly.
I know.
Yeah, well, how could that be used as a threat? I mean, we know how much you love Taylor Swift, and Taylor Swift could call you on your phone and exfil data from you.
I need to disable this setting immediately. This is hitting too close to home.
T-Swift setting.
All right. But that's spot on, right? This personalized data helps phishing be a little bit more a little bit more targeted, right? And so, all right, let's keep this moving. So control use of insecure content exceptions is set to enabled. Do not allow any site to load mixed content. So this is saying like pulling information from two different sites at the same time. What's this really saying here?
It's basically saying that you're loading an HTTPS site, a secured site, and then you're pulling in content that's not. So you're making certain presumptions that the content you're looking at is good. It's there's no man in the middle attack that can be. You can't use Wireshark on decrypting that data or anything like that, or man in the middleing. I'm sure you can actually. I'm gonna get a call from him. He's like, you're wrong.
Why is Barricade calling me right now?
exactly. I'm in the computer, but in all seriousness, the having that insecure content on a secure site could lead to some sort of
bad things.
Interaction. Bad things could happen. And it's interesting because there's actually a control in CMMC that's related to split tunneling, VPN split tunneling, and it's kind of the same principle. It's that you don't want content from two separate places to be commingling in the same secure area. So yeah, I like this one a lot, and it's if you have a site that's using security certificates and it's delivering secure content, they shouldn't be delivering insecure content on that same page. It could lead to a host of problems. And if there is insecure content being delivered, that's bad. And at the end of the day, a threat actor that knows what they're doing is going to also deliver secure content. So if there's insecure content on there, it could be a misconfiguration or something like that you don't want loading on your browser anyway.
Well, it can kind of fool the user too. If they recognize some content as accurate, maybe they assume the other content is as well. And it leads to, an inappropriate action potentially.
If I'm reading an autobiography on Abe Lincoln and it randomly is all true, and then it says he fought aliens to save America, I don't know if that's mixed in there between a bunch of truth. I might believe it because everything up to that point was accurate.
That's
right?
That's been known for a long time.
I was going to say, I don't know what you're talking about.
It is not fiction, right?
That's actually facts, Zach. So
I apologize. I thought I was in the fiction. Anyway, all right. Next setting. That's a very good point, right? If something pops up here that is from a trusted source on a trusted source, you're inclined to trust it, even if you don't want to.
That's my point.
Let's get to this next one here. Another one on control use of JavaScript, JIT, is set to enabled, do not allow any site to run JavaScript, JIT. Is this I don't actually know what JIT stands for. Is this just in time or what?
Yeah, okay. So. I'm 99% sure in this.
Cyber QP will come from the woodwork yelling at us if it's not.
That's funny. Yeah, so at the end of the day, this I think this is like a default setting in like the hardened Internet Explorer. If you're like on a server, like this has been around for a long time or something like it. You don't want scripts to run on your web browser in an unmonitored, unfettered manner just whenever the hell they want. So
yeah,
this pretty straightforward.
Was, an effect of numerous attacks that came from Java, and it was built as such to minimize those attacks for sure.
Yep. And I don't know.
Java can run anywhere, and it's very powerful and can do lots of things, good things and bad things. So we just want to make sure the bad things don't happen.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's a more up-to-date process that websites don't need to leverage this, but I will note again, this is a level 2 setting. So maybe there are a lot of older websites that rely on this to function the way you expect, which is probably why CIS has it as a level 2, because if you're an employee, you don't understand why that website's not loading. You don't understand why that link's not working. But in reality, it could be because it's too large of a risk you're willing to accept.
Well, I'll give you an example. The CIS Syscat Pro tool to our scanning tool is a Java-based tool. So you would need to be able to run Java to use that tool. So there's valid exceptions, but you just got to really know what your settings are and manage them appropriately.
And speaking of that, if you did need this setting to run, hypothetically, Syscat, and you had to enable it, talk to us about creating an exception, Mark. Does this need to be reviewed, documented, approved? Can you just high level, what is the process for an exception at a configuration level?
From a technical level, I mean, that would be inputting the information in whatever you're using to harden the system and set the control to begin with. From an administrative perspective, you're going through some sort of whatever change management process you have to properly, document that change, to document that it's an exception, why it's an exception, and to memorialize that discussion in some way, shape, or form, so that if later it ends up biting you in the butt that happened, or a sysadmin comes across this, why is this turned on? Why is this enabled?
Yep.
There's a reason. There's a why. Even if the people who did it aren't there anymore,
Yep.
there's a reason, and you're not moving backwards by accident.
If I remember correctly, I think this can be a limited list. So if you wanted to enable CIS Syscat Pro to run and nothing else, you can set it up that way too. So you can have a partial window, but not allow everything to run.
That's a good point too. A lot of these Chrome and Edge settings I'm finding it's not just 1 or 0. They do allow you to create exceptions within the setting. So that is a good call out there, Rich. All right, awesome. Let's go to this next one here. So we are back to that file system API. So control use of the file system API for reading is set to enabled. Don't allow any site to request read access to files and directory. Is this referring to, again, that local system needing to read?
Yeah, and the read request access, I believe that's something that would pop up, as something that a user could click yes to. So it's the same reason that the when you have the pop-ups for MFA now, a lot of times it's we use Duo, we use Microsoft Authenticator too, but back when they first came out, that push notification was yes or no, and if a user is so used to pushing the green button when the thing pops up, you've essentially trained the monkey to do the thing, and now it's type in this number, or have some sort of challenge, or just type in the number, select the number that's displayed in the screen, kind of thing, to have someone kind of wake up and go, oh, I'm making a decision here, I'm giving information rather than just saying yes or no. So this also, I think, helps to prevent that from happening, the user just clicking yes because something requested a thing it should give it.
Yep. And I'm not the expert on all the choices here. I'm not looking at the GPO, but there could be one saying, enabled at prompt for decision, right? So that it's blocked by default, but allows for decision could be one of the choices. Not for sure. Don't quote me because I'm not looking at this GPO directly, but that is what Mark's referring to here, right? You can have that approver decision, right? And we are trained. We actually talked about this, I think, last week's episode, talking about Microsoft wanting to ingest data. Hey, would you like to help others by letting us figure out what crashed your system? Yes, right? What data are they actually looking at? What are they actually ingesting? Do they probably already have that? I don't know. But
this is another but you're just letting them actually have it.
Exactly. And we can go to this next setting here, but this is very much in the same vein. So we were talking about file system API for reading. Now we're looking at the same thing for writing. And not to say AI twice in a 10-minute window, I guess 27, 37-minute window, having that reading access and this writing access for that AI or that plugin you're using, it can really manipulate things or create more targeted things that you're not realizing when this API is available. Is that correct? Am I going the right way with this?
So if we're looking at security basics, so my background training is in I'm a CISSP, so I have that CIA triad in my head. So confidentiality, integrity, availability. The read access, lends more to confidentiality of data, and the writing leads more to integrity. So to what you were saying earlier, where Abraham Lincoln fought off the aliens, and which is totally true. Being injected into your web browser or something like that as content that you're reading, some misinformation there. The same thing can happen here. If you have a file that you believe to be correct that you have internally, and then all of a sudden something has been written to it, especially something small, a lot of times you're not gonna notice that. That's why things like redlining and contracts is important. You don't know what's been changed. I've had that happen to us where we had a contract that went back and forth, and it was changed prior to us signing it. We signed it. We had no idea. That happened a long time ago to us. And, this is the same sort of principle here. Lessons learned. Yeah, exactly. I'm like, you send something over to me, I'm sending it back in a DocuSign or an Adobe Sign. Oh no, let us send it. I'm like, no, this is the one I'm approving. I'm going to send it out to you.
Yep. No, that's a perfect explanation there. And we're making great time here. So we got about 2 settings left here, and we're getting to my very common topic of setting, Bluetooth. So the one here, I believe, is going to be talking about control use of the web Bluetooth API is set to enabled. Do not allow any site to request access to Bluetooth. So this probably isn't referring to our headsets right here. This is saying an actual site, or is it one of the same?
So
if you know that granularity, which totally fine if not.
No, that's fine. It's requesting access to well, so your web browser doesn't know that my headset is Bluetooth. Your web browser definitely doesn't know that. Mine doesn't either. So there's no reason for it to know or care. It's an audio input device, an output device, right? I'm hearing this webinar through the speaker here, but the web browser doesn't know anything other than the fact that it's a Sennheiser output and such. So it doesn't matter. So this would be more along the lines of your web browser directly, trying to access a Bluetooth device, directly. I'm
Yep.
pretty sure.
That's how I'm interpreting it myself. Yeah. But yeah.
So anyway, you don't want it to be doing that generally. There are exceptions to that. Whereas if I think that even if I'm recalling correctly, I have a oh my god, what are those little things? The little not the Ponagachi. The
don't know where you're going with it, brother.
No, I know. Why haven't you finished the sentence I started in my head?
So, aliens involved?
There are aliens involved as well as Abraham Lincoln, but the it's a little device you can use for proof of concept, hacking, as it were, light hacking. The flipper, thank you. Yes. So the flipper itself, sometimes, if you want to update the firmware in an easy way, I believe you could do that over Bluetooth, if not definitely via USB or something, and you could do it via the web browser. So the web browser may have legitimate reasons for asking for something to talk to something over Bluetooth or something plugged in with USB or something like that. But for the most part, in your day-to-day, you don't actually need that, right?
Flipper's all about intercepting those codes, usually covertly, to play them back at another time, which is generally what you don't want. Maybe that's even why some of this should be turned off, but I don't know.
Exactly. And what it also comes down to is that, we're going through this right now, and we're looking at things that we, remember this being this, or it could be about this. But the point of the matter is, does come back to at least functionality. Yep. If your web browser doesn't need to talk to a Bluetooth device, it doesn't matter why. It doesn't need to. If you don't do it, turn it off.
If someone complains, take it up then.
Exactly. You can always turn it on, back on. You can always make an exception. But at the end of the day, even if there's 50 use cases for why you shouldn't do it, a threat actor is going to find a 51st. And you don't necessarily need to be educated on that 51st reason if Bluetooth, this Bluetooth access is off. It just shouldn't be on if you don't need it, period.
Agreed.
Yep. Limit the blast radius, reduce the attack surface. That's literally what the preventative security and the fundamentals that we talk about week after week in this are talking about. And this is episode 52, guys. Like, there's plenty of settings. You can use Senteon, you can use whatever you want, but these are settings you can do without buying an additional tool, right? You can at least do it for that point in time. It's going to be harder for you to monitor drift and changes, but these are still things you can do with only the cost of labor you're already paying for. All right. The last setting of the episode. Control use of the Web HID API is set to enable do not allow any site to request access to the HID devices via the Web HID API. This, again, is a level 2, so I have a feeling this might be a little disruptive, but what's this referring to here?
Yeah, so human interface devices are the things that you use to interface with the computer as you were a human. I just defined it with the word anyway. So
I won't say what
like
is
mouse. There it is, mouse.
Anyway.
Yeah, right. So mouse, keyboard, and such like that, and these are input devices. They could be output devices, but I think that human interface devices are generally input, and or at least in the traditional sense. And so injecting something into that, mouse clicks, or when the the browser and the cursor's over an opportune area, could be something that you don't want to have happen. From either if it's something that's, fairly benign, like, an advertiser trying to get you to click something that you don't actually want to click, to something more malicious, like, capturing or injecting some sort of code into the website or something like that. Even, modifying the web page. I mean, you press F12, you can modify the code that's on the web page, and you could have something quickly doing that and not even, know it. And then, oh, well, your bank account balance is now 0. And because something got injected in there, and someone pressed pressed F12 and injected some sort of modification to what you're seeing on your screen, and then changed the phone number to call for the bank. So now someone's freaking out and calling the bank when they don't need to. And I've seen some sort of demo on this a very long time ago, so I'm mentioning it specifically. But that's one of 1,000 reasons that something like that could happen if I'm interpreting this correctly.
It's a nasty one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. So that concludes the setting portion of the webinar. Mark, you absolutely killed it. So if you haven't put this together yet, guys, these settings are mitigating the risk of attacks being successful. Mark, you just talked about this. You literally referenced code injection. We talked about the casting settings. So all of the settings we talked about in this episode are truly mitigating the risk of these attacks listed on the screen. Not just these attacks, right? There's always going to be more. But this is MITRE ATT&CK, which CIS is nice enough to map their recommendations over.
Techniques they are. Not all of them.
That's fair.
Ones.
I like that. That's a way better way to say it. You think I'd get better at this, doing it 52 weeks in a row, but not yet. Anyway, these are mapped to CIS. These settings directly relate to these types of attack techniques. Mark, feel free to call out any of these at pointed if you want to, if there's any that we didn't reference, but overall, left of boom, hardening the browser, anything you want to add just to like why an MSP maybe should prioritize this from a security perspective?
I mean, at the end of the day, we've all seen that transition. Depending on how long you've been in the industry, you've seen things from going from local computer based to mainframe based to computer based to mainframe based. You have things like Azure Virtual Desktop, which you could use your web browser to essentially control a remote computer, and you could do that with any sort of software at this point, essentially. So the long and the short is that the commonality that we've seen over the last few years is that there isn't a fat client installed on your computer that's doing this. You're not generally installing applications on the computer anymore. It's going more towards the web. So as that continues to happen, with the exception being Intuit, who has single-handedly held our entire industry back by 5 years by making QuickBooks Online different from QuickBooks Desktop. Don't tell me if I have, I have a lot of trauma from
There's
that.
so many user rights assignments that QuickBooks and Intuit just put without permission, and it's like, why is this here? And it still works without it. We disable it all the time, and I'm like, hey, just best practice. We did take away some privilege from QuickBooks. Can you make sure it still works? And 10 times out of 10 times it still works. So why did they have access?
Absolutely. And in answering your question though, locking down the browser is important. It's not something that a lot of service providers that we've seen have maturity in. In some ways, it's something that we don't have a ton of maturity in. There
vendors
are a lot
as well, right? I don't think there's a lot of opportunity to automate this, right? Obviously, Senteon is doing this now, but until us, I mean, is this an area that vendors even cared about? I guess is one way to say it in a gentle way. I should just preface.
It's something that you could if you make a change to a setting, you could or restrict a web browser. Web browser is like a Swiss Army knife, right? In my opinion, also, and it could do so many things. And pulling out that thread from over there could cause the sleeve to fall off essentially somewhere else. And then if you're trying to perform a task like that, it could cause an issue. And unlike with a fat client where the programmer runs the roost or rules the roost in terms of how their application is working generally, there are many more things that could go wrong with a web browser if misconfigured. And then at the end of the day, who are you calling for support for that? So it's something that I think that a lot of vendors are hesitant to want to manipulate or fully manage.
I mean, if you think about when you fire up your computer in the morning or whenever you fire up your computer, what are you going to launch?
Some of us sleep in, Rich. We know. Some of us start in the afternoon. It is what it is.
Entrepreneurs, I know how it goes.
I'm getting attacked all up. It's fine.
So you're probably going to fire up Mail, maybe Slack if you use that in a browser, if not the browser first. The browser is going to be one of the top applications that you fire up every time you turn on your machine, because it's at the center of so many services and applications that everyone needs to get access to. So I think we're going to see more and more exploits coming through the browser, because it's a ubiquitous application now, and there are potentials for the settings to lead to malicious things. So I think we'll continue to see more and more importance placed on the browser, because it's really the epicenter of how people consume technology.
Yeah, and let's expand on that, and I'll ask you a trend question, Mark. So Rich kind of gave the Slack example. If you open Slack in Chrome and Edge, right, that's obviously the portal, whatever you want to call it. But what if you're downloading Slack or Discord locally? You have all these applications. Configuring we talk about the OS with Senteon, the browser with Senteon, right? An area we're looking at entering is going to be application hardening and becoming this all-around hardening platform.
Mm-hmm.
Is application hardening something really prioritized in the MSP model today? Is this more of an enterprise activity? Is everyone just starting to do hardening across the board rapidly right now?
There's certain levels. So application hardening, from our perspective, from a vendor, when talking about like vendors and them wanting to put out a product that'll do that. I mean, you have things going way back, and I can't name any specific vendors, but a lot of times, having that heavy restriction on that fat client or those local applications, vendor updates their application, and it will cause a major problem, in not being able to
Windows
access
has an
something.
update. They change a reg key and they don't tell you. I mean,
Yeah,
we might
there
have
have
seen
been
And
stuff
pretty
like
everything else.
that.
cool solutions to kind of approach that marketplace. Aptiga and Nerdio are ones that will take I think Aptiga's morphed into something else, but they would take a full package. Say you're using WordPress and you're using X, Y, and Z applications. That's kind of your prod environment. What they would do is take that whole stack of products and harden them as a service. And then, and we all know that there can be interdependencies, and maybe if you flip one switch, it breaks the other stuff. So they figure that all that stuff and do the deployments, which is really a great way to stay secure. Nerdio is doing something like that on Azure as well.
Yep.
We're working with them
Just
on
saw
that
that today. Yep.
to take a whole package, 5 or 6 applications as a unit, and harden them in conjunction and in a coordinated fashion so everything works properly together. And then, things get updated out of sequence and so forth. And so there's capability to account for that. And so that, I think, is a really cool area, and another area that I think we'll see more on, rather than just bespoke components, to really take a package and harden that as a whole.
Yeah, and you do have some vendors out there that are taking different approaches to it, such as like ring fencing of
Yep.
permissions, and allow listing and such of certain applications, and managing that from a high level. And then ThreatLocker does that. We work with ThreatLocker on that, and they do a great job with it, in my opinion. So
Yep.
we're definitely seeing that. But if you had seen something like a ThreatLocker like 5 years ago, it was it was
Exactly.
it was much harder to implement
Yeah.
those things. And a lot of that maturity came from the vendor, and a lot of that maturity also came from how they're taking more of the responsibility and putting less of it on the MSP to actually configure or to
Customer
manage
feedback.
afterwards. Yeah.
I'm happy to take the ThreatLocker approach with Senteon and just grow that way. I'm good with that. They're a good size, right? They're pretty big.
They're getting there. Yeah, I was gonna say you get there.
It could be worse.
All right. That is absolutely perfect, guys. So that's where we really talk about the security point of view. But let's go to this last slide here. Security benefits aside, are there other benefits to MSPs looking at considering doing this? Is there actually a efficiency gain? Is there any other benefits outside of just the security with hardening?
I mean, if you're taking the approach of using we have some co-managed clients that
I like the smile that comes with this story. A good preface.
It's the evil smile. That is the evil.
So we have some clients who co-managed clients that are larger, that have internal IT, and years ago, one in particular, they give everybody a computer and a cell phone, and they're like, well, they're yours to keep if you leave, but they're ours, for now, but you can do personal stuff on them. So we have this culture that had evolved for 1,000 years. But they started at 30 something years ago.
Sure.
And so it was a benefit of working for the company that you would have a cell phone, period, or that you would have a computer, period. So that's the culture that they instilled. And this company's been around again for 30 something years. Nowadays, obviously you want that separation, but getting that out of the culture, especially this organization has had people that are in there for the 30 plus years. They're a great organization to work for, and we're very, proud to work with them. But that being said, having some of this culture shift was a little bit difficult. But by starting to turn off some of these features that they would normally use in a personal experience with the
Can't
with
save
their
passwords to the browser, right? Something like that.
stuff like that, stuff like they would normally use, as part of their personal computing experience. They're now they're either discouraged or prevented completely from doing, which makes that personal browsing experience or personal use experience extremely unpalatable. And so you end up with users using their work computer for fewer personal things. And because of that, you end up running into fewer problems as an MSP. The answer is, well, what are you doing? Oh, I was just uploading, vacation photos, and this happened. It's like, from a help desk. Well, why are you doing that? You're not supposed to do that.
Yeah.
Versus, oh, well, should we help you with this? Should we not? And then there's ambiguity, and then this gets escalated. We shouldn't be helping them. It's more like, nope, work computer, you're doing non-work things. That's in violation. I can't help you with that. I'm so sorry. We have a browser thing preventing you from doing this specifically because you shouldn't be doing it. So, yeah.
Having the conversation as to like, it's blocked, why not, is a little bit easier than, hey, help me do this when they shouldn't be doing it anyway. Just kind of, I guess, is there an education aspect to this? You're not just turning off things blind, not that you're doing it blindly, but unbeknownst to the customer. Is it a communication style, or?
You need to, so it depends on the size of the client, the client partner, but, essentially if it's co-managed, you'd have, this should be in some sort of, have a discussion, some sort of change advisory board meeting, and, put some sort of, CR change request in, or something like that. But generally you have, you do your, risk assessment, you do your discovery, you put the plan together for implementing these controls, and then generally you do it to some sort of UAT group or something like that, user acceptance testing group, and then you see what that affects. And usually the users that are more open to change, that are open to giving feedback, that want to help the process, and then eventually you filter all that down to the end users who are just like, no, who moved my cheese type of thing. And those users, there will always be users like that. There will always be disruptions that happen from these types of things. It's just minimizing them and justifying them. That's
Mark. I'm thinking about all the risk if these people use a computer for a few years and then they get to keep it or whatever. That guy's been around for 30 years. He's got a whole garage full of old computers with all kinds of stuff on it.
That is an uphill battle, and we're actually making really good progress with that particular one.
Awesome.
It's they understand the risks that are associated now, and it's just getting C-level to do to do it, because everyone else is fine with it. It's just, but that's what
it looks like Dagley's actually having a little bit of the same mindset, and this brings up a question I wanted to ask. I've never heard anyone talk about a user accepted group, UAT, I think is what you said. Something Felicia King really preaches is the MSP needs to truly have a seat at the table, or they need to be in that boardroom and Degley talking with C-levels, right? That is almost what an MSP has to do, and be at that table to get anything to happen. This UAT, did you assist in the creation? Was it there when you got there? Or I've never heard any MSP do that. It sounds really interesting.
I mean, I think those that implement to a large enough group do it. That's just what we're calling it. I'm not sure if it's an industry term or not at this point, but we make sure that
the user deployment rings, but this sounds more specific.
Yeah, this is more along the lines of, hey, here are some key stakeholders. Here are the people who might even be noisy about stuff. People who want to be involved in the process. We deploy to them first. That we get their feedback, we make adjustments, everything okay, cool. Now we can move on to everybody else, and then it's more of like a summarized, hey, we're making changes to this. Your managers are already involved. They already have noted, any issues that you're going to have. Here are the problems that you have that you're going to have that we can't correct. Here are some exceptions that we've made. Here are some of this, that, and the other thing. Yeah, being able to do that is important. It takes a lot of time to do that, but that's sort of like sharpening the axe before cutting down the tree kind of thing. Yeah, you have to sharpen the axe. It'll take longer to sharpen the axe, but even if it takes just as long to sharpen the axe and cut down the tree than to cut down the tree with a dull axe, this is more of, oh, this isn't
Less
left or
painful.
right of boom. It's much less painful, and you look better as the provider because you foresaw
prepared.
all of this. Yeah, a lot of times with the UAT testing and this and that, it's like, well, this is taking forever to do. Oh my God, why is this taking so long? And then we're like, okay, we've gotten everything done, and then we just turn the key and it's done. It's like, well, what's implementation look like? It's like, we did it. It's done. Oh, what are you talking about? Shouldn't that have taken a while? No, we did all the prep work.
We did all the prep work.
Yeah, it's done. We did it. You're welcome.
No, you never hear thank you as an MSP. No, I'm kidding.
We do. Sometimes.
No, that's awesome, guys. And that's right at the hour. So, Mark, I do want to leave you, if you want to just do a quick little takeaway from the episode, anything you want to leave with the audience, few seconds, man. Time is yours.
I mean, it's all about least privilege. It's all about least function. And at the end of the day, what we were closing with in terms of communication, talk to your clients about why this is important. Talk to them about the risks of not doing it, because everything's a risk-based conversation.
Awesome. Very, very cool. Thank you for being a great guest, Rich. Always great having you here. And let's focus up on the, oh, absolutely, brother. And let's put this up on the big screen, the upcoming presentations. So next week, we are going to be talking about extensions and authentication. We got Bob Miller coming in from, well, I say from IR Games because that's how I know him personally, getting involved with his tabletop. But I do believe he is a greater role as a COO at an MSP. But anywho, Bob's coming on next week. We got Ray Feldman from LastPass and James Beerley from Secure Ops. Really excited for the next few episodes. Again, if you want to test out Senteon internal, external assessments, we do a promotion. Just let us know you watch the webinar and you will get 100 free assessments. Thank you, everyone.